So welcome to Positivity is the Way to Go. He is a 62-year-old lifelong vegan, having won titles in kickboxing and MMA, who still competes in professional grappling and BJJ events. Welcome my guest today, Steve Dunlap.
It's actually Phil.
I mean, Phil Dunlap, my bad.
No
I'm sorry.
problem, no problem. I forget my name
Phil,
sometimes too, so don't worry about it.
Phil Dunlap, welcome today, man, on this Friday,
Glad to be here.
Well, I've been trying to have you on, but you've been busy, had to cancel on me.
Yeah, I actually I own a business, and the end I do a lot of business with the government, and this is the end of the government's fiscal year, so it gets kind of crazy.
Oh, okay. Because I'm like, man, Steve, I'm like, Phil canceled on me 3, 4 times already. I'm like, man, I can't get a handle of this.
I always try to tell people, for at least for me, time is my greatest constraint all the time because I'm pulled in so many different directions. I have the business, I have a family, I have the school, I do my training, so it's kind of like I'm always running around like a chicken with my head cut off after a while.
Well, you seem like you getting the hang of it. So, uh, uh, how was your training routine throughout your career, both mentally and physically?
Well, look, I always tell people I was brought up in it. So, from being a little kid, I was training in Burmese martial arts and Lethwei, which is Burmese kickboxing. And I used to have to do a lot of like shin conditioning. I used to kick a wooden post in the backyard. So a lot of it was just that learning to be extremely comfortable with different levels of pain and discomfort. And I always say that, whether it's in life or whether it's in sports, the faster you get used to the fact that it's a grind. Life is a grind. It tries to grind you down. Sports is a grind. It grinds on you. It physically grinds on you. Sometimes it mentally tries to break you. And I tell people all the time, in other words, you just have to dig down deep and decide you want it bad enough. But a lot of it was, at least with me, is I didn't know any better. It was what I was brought up to do. So, in other words, it's not like, for a lot of guys, they make a choice. I'm going to go do this. For me, it was available. I had access to it, and it was a way I got my grandfather's attention. So it was kind of like I trained a lot. And I do have to be honest with you. My greatest regret, or I should say, one of my greatest, like, hindsight is 2020. One of my greatest, when I look back at it, I overtrained and I didn't eat enough. Okay, if I could really change one thing about my earlier career, I would start to listen to my body and start to eat more food.
Well said, man. So, can you describe your preferred fighting style and how it developed over time?
Okay, I through and through. I always joke around, like, I happen to be a black belt in jujitsu. I compete a lot in professional grappling. I've won the worlds, okay, but I'm a striker. I am a kickboxer at heart. It's what I love. Like, in a violent confrontation, if I'm on the ground, the last thing you're going to do is get submitted. I'm probably going to just sweep you, get on top, and then pound you into oblivion because I'm a striker at heart. It's what I do. I hit things. And for me, I was very fortunate, or possibly unfortunate, to have grown up in Lethwei, which is Burmese kickboxing. And it's a form of kickboxing that has a very limited rule set. There's no gloves. Every strike is legal, including groin strikes and headbutts. Okay. On top of that, to win the fight, back before 94, when they modified the rules a little bit, back before 94, to win, you had to knock the guy out 3 times. He had 2 times to continue if he wanted. Okay, you knock a guy out, he's got 1 minute to decide whether he wants to keep going. So sometimes you got to knock the guy out 3 times in a fight to win. So I always tell people it's more of there's a different tempo for it. In other words, there's no sense of sticking and moving and scoring points. It's always about trying to knock your opponent out. And my style was very, I was very tall and I was fighting in Southeast Asia. So I was when I first started fighting at 15, I had my first pro fight over there. I was 140, I was about 145 and I was 6'1". So it was kind of like I lived by my roundhouse kicks to the legs and my clinch game. My first 9 fights, I won 8 of them by headbutt, and I had 28 headbutt knockouts by the time I retired. So the headbutts were a big part of my game. Even in my grappling game, I use my head all the time. I always said it for some reason it was just my best weapon. And I always say that just shows how stupid I was because, like, hey, I can use my whole body as a weapon. I think I'll use my head. What can go wrong with that? So I always joke around about that, but it's kind of like the idea is I always like the raw intensity of Lethway. And it's one of the reasons why I still enjoy watching kickboxing, but I prefer mixed martial arts.
Well said. So, what was the most challenging fight you ever had, and and what did you learn from that experience?
Uh, Okay. I was very fortunate. Fighting was just fighting. Okay. And Henzo Gracie said it best. Okay. Sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail. And the key to being a good fighter is when you're in the nail. When you're being the nail, to stay in the fight and believe you can still win. Like, I've won several fights that by by all rights I probably should have lost just because I can take an inordinate amount of abuse. But honestly, most of my real trials were outside the ring. I had a broken neck at 26 that it took me 10 years to get medical clearance to fight again. I had pancreatic cancer at 46, and then I just had a recent bout with cancer again, and I had to have my salivary gland removed along with the tumor. So, in other words, that stuff to me is the real fight. The fights in the ring, it's kind of like it's a challenge. To me, it's always been fun. It's like, how do I phrase this? When somebody says to me, uh, do you ever get nervous before a real world confrontation? It's like if you come up to me in a parking lot and say, I'm going to kick your ass, I'm going to look at you and say, is it Tuesday night? And it was Tuesday night is the night people kick my ass. So it's kind of like, to me, it's like, the average person looks at fighting as something outside their comfort zone. Meanwhile, to me, it's the most comfortable thing in the world. When I'm getting my ass kicked, I don't panic. I'm comfortable there. I spent my whole life there. Like I always told people, like, in jujitsu, for the sake of argument, it takes a long time to get a black belt. And I always told people the real difference between a white belt and a black belt is I've already tapped 10 million times. So I've already got my ass kicked 10 million times. Okay. So now I don't get my ass kicked as much. Okay. The whole sport, the whole training for fighting, the training itself gets you ready for that endeavor in the ring. And I find the greatest obstacle for guys bringing their training to the ring is not a physical obstacle. It's mental and emotional. And that's one thing that I almost feel guilty with my students because so many of my students, like, they come to it, let's say 18, 19, they have their first fight, 25, they have their first fight. It's a whole new world. First of all, they book a fight for 6 weeks out. Okay, you got a 6-week training camp, and that's a short notice camp. Okay, so now all of a sudden you're training harder. You have a vision, you have a date. On Saturday night, November 8th, I'm getting in a cage and I'm going to fight somebody in front of a bunch of people. Okay, now you're going to spend the next 6 weeks obsessing, training harder, worrying. Then you have the lead up, like, the week into the fight where you're really trying to manage your weight and make sure your weight's on point. Now, a lot of guys break during weight cutting. I always say weight cutting is more mental than physical. Like, how do I phrase it? Like, I can, if I want to, I can drop like 20 pounds in 24 hours, just water weight, because I'll just sit there until it's gone. And then you rehydrate the next day. But I tell people all the time, it's the mental game that gets them, the nerves. And I always tell people, like, until you've experienced it, the lead up to the fight, the final prep, the weight cutting, make sure everything's dialed in, the wait all day. You go to the weigh-ins the night before. Now you're in a hotel somewhere. You're sitting there wondering if you've done enough. Am I good enough? Especially if it's the first time you've done it. Then you sit around all day long. You know, they do a medical on you, then you sit around all day, they do rules meetings, and then you're basically waiting for about 7.5 hours before the fights even start. Then you're waiting another 3 hours, let's say, before your fight is on. By the time you fight, a lot of guys are mentally and emotionally fried. The other thing they're not used to is that adrenaline dump. You know, that fight or flight syndrome when they get in that cage. Okay, some guys get worn out. Like they're doing 5 minute rounds in practice. They're doing 5 minute rounds in practice, and they do a 3 minute at the end of the first 3 minute round in a fight. They're exhausted. Okay, so a lot of that is emotional, mental, and I always say the best fighters are the ones that really learn how to adapt to the mental and emotional aspects of fighting.
Yeah, because it was a fight in the UFC like a while ago where somebody they didn't cut weight, so they took their person half of their person they gave it to the fighter that they canceled. You know.
I between you and I have a thing about making weight. Oh, like a phobia. If I commit to doing 205, I'll show up at 203. I can't help it. Okay, but I'm one of those people, like I'm really old school. My word is my bond. And if I agree to come in at 205, if I have to chop my foot off, I'm going to come in at 205. I just I cannot make excuses for guys not making weight. It's just completely unprofessional. As far as I'm concerned, as a fighter, you have three jobs: make weight, show up, get in the cage. Now, if you suck and you get your ass kicked, fine. At least you did your job. Okay, but what I'm saying is you agree to three things. I agree I'm going to show up on Thursday or Friday night before the fight. I'm going to weigh 195. Okay, I'm going to show up on Saturday and get in the cage. And I'm at least going to try once I'm in the cage. You know, I've seen some weird things over the years, but it's kind of like I've seen guys get in there, and it still amazes me to this day when I see some guy get in there and he's obviously got no training at all.
Yeah, that happens a lot. You know, a lot of people don't be prepared, or they may be eating too much and stuff and everything. You know, because
I
sometimes they be overweight. You know, they be like 10 pounds overweight, and they supposed to be like 165, but they 175.
I had a guy, I was in Arizona and I was doing a grappling event, and it was kind of funny because, it was for a 205 title. So at the time I was about 215. So I cut the 10 pounds, no problem. I weigh in at 205. Now my opponent had contacted them about 3 days before, saying he was going to be a little bit heavy. Okay, so the matchmaker reaches out to me and says, Phil, he's gonna be a little heavy. Do you care? I go, nah, I don't care. What, 10 pounds? What the hell? I don't care. Okay, because half the times I do ultra heavyweight too. In other words, I don't, sometimes it's nice to go against bigger guys because you're faster. Although in my case, I'm so old, I'm not faster than anybody anymore. But it's one of those things where I always tell people, guy shows up. I still weigh in at 205 because I figure it's for the 205 belt. I might as well leave with the belt if I beat him. But he gets there. Promoter comes over to me and goes, Phil, man, like, he's like heavy. And I go, what do you mean like heavy? 283? I'm like, what? 283? Why do you even take the match? Okay. Guy comes, weighs in at 283. And this is the best part of the whole damn thing. He ends up not taking the match because they won't make it for the belt. Like if I win, I get the belt. If he wins, he doesn't because they can't give the 205 belt to a guy who weighs 280 pounds. Okay. So in other words, he wouldn't grapple because he wouldn't get the belt. And I ended up grappling against somebody else, but it was kind of like, what?
Yeah, he was about like 70 something pounds bigger than you.
You get a lot.
But
I'm actually doing the IBJJF World, not Worlds, Pans in October, and the absolute division is like that. Every once in a while, you look across the mat and you're like, "Oh my God, this is going to be a long day."
yeah, so we got some. I got a question of the day from a fans. Her name is Jessica from New York. She would like to know, what is your favorite style of martial arts?
Lethway, Burmese boxing. It's called Lethway. That's my personal favorite style of martial art.
Well, okay.
Okay,
And
now remember, I'm not one of those guys. I don't get into bests. There's lots like, in other words, train boxing, train wrestling, train jujitsu, train sambo, train Muay Thai. Just train. Go out there and train something effective. There's so many great styles out there, like jujitsu. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is great. Judo's great. Wrestling's great. Boxing's great. Kickboxing is great. Kyokushin karate is great. Okay, there's so many great styles out there that I always tell people, stop focusing on the best. Stop focusing on who's the best and just go out there and train and find what's best for you. Like if you're claustrophobic and you don't want to be rolled up in a ball and have a guy sitting on top of your head, I suggest not grappling. If you don't want to get punched in the face, boxing's probably a bad choice.
well, yeah, well said. So, did you know, according to MMA, Suka, 84% of UFC champions fought at least 5 times or won a belt for a smaller promotion before joining the UFC. What was your experience like in the regional and amateur circuits?
Okay, both as a competitor and a coach. As a competitor, I won a couple regional belts in mixed martial arts. As a kickboxer, I was a three-time world champion in Burmese boxing, Lethwei, and I won a stadium championship in Thailand. I also fought K1 in Japan and a few other big organizations overseas. But in MMA, I basically won a couple regional promotions belts in my what was it, late 30s, early 40s. And that's because mixed martial arts, I had 10 years off from broken neck, and I came back and I started doing mixed martial arts and a little bit of kickboxing. But and as a coach, it's a climb. I always tell people there's local promotions, and it depends on the region you're in. Like I'll be honest with you, and this is not to diminish anybody or anything. I came from New York and New Jersey, which had a huge mixed martial art thing going on when I left. And that was about 15 years ago. And then I went to Vegas, which is the mecca of mixed martial arts. Okay. So it was kind of like I started out coaching guys like in high school gymnasiums and college gymnasiums. Then suddenly we're in some of the smaller casinos in Atlantic City fighting. Then I moved to Vegas and I've got guys fighting their first fights in big casinos. I had one guy do Tough Enough. What was it? I forget what they call it, but it's at a 20,000 seat stadium. Okay, for his first fight. So in other words, a lot of times it depends on the region you're in. And then I moved back to Virginia, and there's a lot of grassroots promotions here that my guys will fight in, where they'll do their first 3, 4 fights there, maybe pick up a championship belt. And then you'll go regional. Now, the regional ones are like Ring of Combat up in New York, Tough Enough in Vegas. You have these regional organizations which you go to and you try to win one of the regional crowns as an amateur. Then you'll go pro, and you'll do the process all over again. And I'm a big one on the way I manage somebody's career is as an amateur, because it doesn't count. The great thing about fighting is you have an amateur career and a pro career. Your pro career counts. Every loss hurts your marketability. Your amateur career, nobody even knows who you are. Like Ilya Taporia, everybody knows he's great. Everybody knows his pro record. Nobody knows his amateur record. Nobody cares. I have my guys take a lot of tough amateur fights, probably some fights they shouldn't take, because I want them to hone their craft as amateurs. So when they go pro, they're ready to make a mark and make some money. Because as far as I'm concerned, the day you turn pro, now it becomes about trying to maximize the money you're going to make doing it. It's no longer necessarily just about wins and losses and learning. Okay. As a pro fighter, it's kind of like that idea is you're trying to increase your marketability. You're trying to take fights that will get you to that big stage where you can actually get a decent paycheck.
Well said, man. You got a lot of knowledge, Phil. You've been in the game a long time. So, what were the most important aspects of your mental preparation for fighters, according to MSN? Professional fighters say 90% of it is mental.
I have to agree. There was 90% of everything in life is mental. If you don't believe, like I always tell people, like, a lot of guys, they have a tendency, when you do martial arts and you're coaching guys, they have a tendency to like try to put you on a pedestal and like give you the credit for them getting better. And I always tell them, all I do is give a roadmap. I've taught a lot of guys who didn't pay attention to the roadmap. I've taught guys that paid attention to the roadmap and became successful. They have the hard part. But the idea is, I always tell people everything in life starts out with that idea. Is you decide, you're sitting at home. Let's say you've never taken a martial art class and you watch the UFC and you're like, I'd like to try that. Maybe I'd even like to try to do it. Okay. So the first step is you're sitting at home thinking about it. Do you actually pick up the phone and make an appointment to go someplace, or do you get in your car and go someplace and actually try it? That's to me, that's like a huge mental step, okay? Because you have a comfort zone, your living room, watching on TV, thinking I can do that, okay? And then outside that comfort zone is actually trying to do that. And that's the first step. And then what happens is guys come in and train and they start to get pretty good. And then they say, man, I think I'd like to try to fight. Okay. The first step is you got to go to your coach and talk to them about, and that's a hurdle. Some guys, they hesitate to. Okay. They don't want to be told no. They don't want to feel like they're not good enough. Okay. And then you commit to doing it. But the thing is, I can believe in you. I can see it in you, but you have to believe yourself. My job is to help you to see what I see in you. And I've always said that's the biggest weak link in fighting is number one, belief in yourself, and the fact that trusting. And when I say trusting, trusting that when you've done your work, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. Like for me, when I compete, it's all guys laugh because I'll be coaching them in a grappling event, and I'll be wearing like cargo pants and a t-shirt, and then I'll run off in the corner, throw a pair of board shorts and call my division and a rash guard on. I don't warm up. I just walk out. I shake the guy's hand, give him a hug. Boom, we grapple. I get up and I go back to coaching. In other words, I get nervous coaching. Okay, I am absolutely unnervous competing. In other words, to me, it's almost like you hear surfers talk about the perfect wave. That moment I walk on the mat and you're looking at me and I'm looking at you, we shake hands and ref says go. That's my perfect moment. There's no place else I feel more comfortable or I feel I belong more. So for me, I never really had that mental aspect. I always felt like I always had it almost to the opposite. I almost thought no matter how bad things were, I could always come back from it. Okay, that in other words, you get that idea that I'm just I'm just not going to get beat. I always had that like almost like epic belief system. I'm one of those people. It's like my wife jokes around all the time. The easiest way to get me to do something is tell me it can't be done. Okay, because I'm one of those guys. Tell me I can't do it. I'm going to go do it just to prove you wrong. It's like I tell people all the time, we have to get you in touch with whatever it is inside you that makes you realize that if you give it your all, you have nothing to worry about. Whatever's going to happen after that is going to happen. And I always say that's one of the pure things about combat sports. Okay, I believe you and I, let's say, have a kickboxing match. There's three things going on. There's you, there's me, and there's a match. We're both involved in a match, and it almost has a life of its own. As we're hitting each other, one of us gets wobbled and still manages to pull off, let's say, a head kick. Okay. And it's kind of like whatever's going to happen is going to happen. It almost has a life of its own. And I'm a big one on this, like, watching tape for the sake of argument. You can look at a tape and see a guy's fast. Okay. And you can prepare for it. And then you get in there and you're like, holy shit, I knew he was fast. Not that fucking fast. Okay. So sometimes it's kind of like you can't be prepared, but you just have to learn to accept and try to overcome whatever comes up. And it's one of the things I love about the training is it teaches you to solve problems under pressure.
Well said, man. So what do you think, what do you want people to remember you for as a fighter?
Honestly, just that I had fun out there. Okay, I'll be honest with you. If you asked me that at 24, I want to be the baddest man in the world. Okay. Now I just want people to say, I don't think there was anybody who had any more fun doing it. I know that's not what people expect to hear, but I will tell you, I always say I may not be the best, but I don't think anybody enjoys it more than me.
Well, let's get into the UFC deal and the UFC and Conor McGregor. What are your thoughts on the Paramount deal for the $7.7 billion going from ESPN to Paramount, where it ain't gonna be the pay-per-view, it ain't gonna be no more pay-per-views, and the fighters gonna get more money. They're gonna get a bigger
Well,
purse.
I've always felt between you and I've always felt that pay-per-view was basically a dying market. With all the streaming and everything going on and illegal streams and everything like that, I think pay-per-view was on its last legs as a money making thing. And we got to the point with the UFC where they were charging so much for the pay-per-views that a lot of people weren't watching them. Like even myself, unless there was a fighter I had an emotional attachment to or a fight I wanted to see, I would just skip the pay-per-view and watch the fights afterwards. So the idea is like I tell people that I think it going on regular TV is great because in fact it's like the Tough Enough program is what made the UFC what it is today. That exposure on national TV to the average person. Okay, they saw something and they saw Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner beating the hell out of each other, and they were like, "Holy shit, this is great!" And people started to tune in, and it took off from there. But it's one of those things where I love anything that brings money and exposure into the sport. Okay, I like anything that benefits the athletes. I do have one problem with the UFC. They don't treat the athletes fairly. Yeah, that's just my personal opinion. The athletes are way underpaid for the amount of money that the UFC is making.
Well, ain't there like a Dana White problem though? And then they also need Conor McGregor to come back, because he is a draw right now,
But that's between you and I. That's only one fight. That's only one fighter. In other words, that's always been part of the problem with building yourself around a personality. Now, look, they for a while they built themselves around Ronda Rousey, and then when Ronda Rousey started to
Yeah,
lose,
and Brock Lesnar too.
right? Okay, and a lot of times they between you and I, Conor McGregor's done. I think in other words, he was a great fighter. I think he's a Looney Tune. Like what I'm saying is, I think he's a train wreck as a person, and I think his career's done because all. Have you seen how big he's gotten?
No, but I know that I know that people in Ireland they don't like him at all, especially the women. They say he raped a woman and stuff. I don't know if it's true, but a lot of women
I,
in
I'm I'm
Ireland
I'm
they
not a
don't like.
fan. I'm not a fan of the. I feel he goes too far in hyping. But then again, I'm old school. I'm not one of those guys. I don't feel the need to say nasty shit when hyping a fight. Yeah, my opponent's great. He's tough. He's going to give me the fight of my life. That type of thing. I'm not going to sit there and call his wife ugly and shit like that. It's just stupid to me. And I get a kick out of all the shit talking. It may work for the fans, but I got to be honest with you. We're about to get in the cage, and you're going to punch me in the face. I'm going to punch you in the face. I don't care what you say. It's not going to bother. When he fought Khabib, Khabib didn't care what he said. Khabib was just planning on beating the hell out of him, and he did. But it's kind of like I think Connor had his time, but if you look at his last performances, he's been terrible.
Yeah, he lose all the time now. And the thing is, he got credibility off the Floyd Mayweather fight when he brought home 50 million and Mayweather got 100
Now I
million.
got listen. I got no problem with you making money. I got no problem with that. In other words, he hit the
But
bank on that one.
that put him on a map though. Without that fight, wouldn't nobody care about him at all because he wouldn't be
Actually,
the
that
draw he
that's not
was.
necessarily true because he was big. when I was in Vegas, when he would fight in Vegas, I swear to God, you'd have thousands of Irish people from Ireland. They're going
Ye-
nuts.
Yeah,
Vegas would all of a sudden have an Irish accent.
but his people turned on him. They like people don't like him anymore in Ireland, you know? So
Yeah,
he's not revered anymore over
he
there.
he honestly he's blown it. I got to be honest with you. He went way too far on the hype train. As I always said, what made Muhammad Ali Muhammad Ali? Man talked shit like he was great at it. In other words, not only was he great at talking shit, but it was lyrical. Okay. In other words, it was funny. It made you laugh. Okay. And then he went out and backed it up. Okay. Like if you beat Ali, you had to be a hell of a fighter and beat a hell of a and fight a hell of a fight. And Ali never quit. He went with Norton with a broken jaw, finished the fight. Okay, it's kind of McGregor wasn't that guy. As soon as McGregor ends up in deep water, he gives up. So it's kind of like I don't think having him come back is good for the sport, other than maybe getting the UFC a big payday.
Well, yeah, they want more money, you know, because they got like Makachev. He just won the belt. He beat I don't know who he beat, and they got they had Dustin Porter. He retired. You know, they got Robert Whitaker. You know, Calvin Gastelum and stuff. You know, I think they need bigger draws. You know, because they don't have a bigger draw like they did in the past with Daniel Cormier and John Jones. You know, he just retired.
Somebody
They need.
somebody will come along in this next generation that will galvanize the crowd. In other words, but the idea is where the UFC goes wrong, and like they did it with Paige Van Zandt. Okay, they try to decide who's going to be the next thing. Okay, I think they're better off letting the cream come to the cream rise to the top and then getting behind it. Like I think they should be putting more into Ilya Taporia.
Yeah, yeah. I think he should get the biggest fight right now. You know.
Pereira.
He should fight by the champ. He should fight by the belt. Come on, Daniel Cormier just said that that'll be a good draw, you know.
And
But
then
right now they trying to build up Patty Pimblett and everything.
that's what I'm saying
Patty
is
the Batty.
they're
That's what he's
they're
trying to build up
deciding
right now.
they're deciding who they want to be the next guy. And I think that's a mistake. When you do that, it happened with Paige Van Zandt, it happened with Sage Northcutt, where they decided they were going to get a guy to the top. Both failed. Okay. Because it's more than just the talent and the look. You have to be able to perform. In other words, when the pressure's on, you got to go out there and do it. You can have the look, you can have everything, but if you don't perform, like why was Reggie Jackson Mr. October? Because when the playoffs came, the man was knocking it out of the ballpark.
When the
Okay, so the
matters,
idea
when the moments matter the most, he got the job done. That's why.
that's why Conor McGregor was so popular for a while, because when he had the big fights, like look at the fight against Jose Aldo, he stepped up big time.
Nate Diaz, yeah,
Right. Okay.
he won the trilogy and stuff.
Right. It's kind of like he had some moments where he really rose to the occasion. And that's what makes legend. Okay. You can't manufacture it. I think the part of the problem is right now in the group of fighters that's so dominant, like Pereira, Taporia, and some of the Dagestani guys, they're not conventionally marketable.
Yeah,
In other words,
They like Kawhi Leonard. They don't really talk a lot. You know, they more quiet and they need a loudmouth. You know, to bring people in. You know, like Sugar Sean O'Malley. But he ain't good so much. He been losing his fights. You know.
see, that's the problem when you're not marketing fighting and you're marketing personality. When the fighter loses, the personality becomes irrelevant.
And they go back to the back of the land and stuff, and they fight these UFC fight of the night stuff to
Right.
build their credibility back up as
I,
competitive.
I honestly, I actually think it's something that's holding mixed martial arts back. And what I mean by this is Dana White was great for the UFC. When I took over the UFC, he took it mainstream, put it on the map, did a great job. But now I'm almost feeling like the UFC and the way they're doing it is holding the sport itself back, as opposed to having, okay, now everybody, when you look at it, Nagano is the linear heavyweight champion. Okay, he left the UFC heavyweight champion. He was undisputed heavyweight champion when he left the UFC. Now he's with the PFL. Had a couple boxing matches. He's still with the PFL. I think it needs to go more toward boxing, where you make the fights that decide who's best. Like number one in the world versus number two. Like back in the day, it was pride in the UFC. The big question was, could Fedor beat this one or that one beat the other one? I think mixed martial arts is at that stage where it needs to go past the organizational level and become a fight-driven business as opposed to an organization-driven business. Now, that's my own personal opinion, so that the fans get the fights they want to see, number one versus number two, number three and number four, not number one fighting number 10, or somebody bumping up in the record from number 15 without a fight, bumping to number 8 so they can get a title shot. Okay, I think it really needs to start following that format of boxing, where you have one heavyweight champ. You don't have a PFL, you don't have a UFC, you have a world heavyweight champ.
Well said, Phil. It was a pleasure having you on, man. Thank you.
I enjoyed myself.